Welcome to Jazz Piano Skills. I'm Dr. Bob Lawrence. It's time to discover, learn, and play jazz piano. Well, I hope everyone has been enjoying playing the improvisational developmental patterns for the primary sounds of E flat. And of course, exploring the various fingering patterns that require a conscious shifting of the hand in order to establish a jazz articulation and to prepare the hand for continuous ascending or descending movement when improvising. Not an easy task, right? It takes a serious commitment and patience to develop proper hand movement in addition to nailing down the correct chord scale relationships. So if you are sticking with the program that we have been tackling since the start of the new year, then congrats. It's now become an integral part of your practice routine, which we all know needs to happen in order to have the success with this essential jazz piano skill that you're hoping to have. And today we take another huge step and tackle the altered dominant sounds for E flat, the sharp 11, the flat 13, flat 9, flat 13, and of course the fully altered sound as well, which is the flat 9, sharp 9, flat 5, sharp 5 sound. So today you are going to discover essential jazz improvisation exercises. You're going to learn developmental arpeggio and scale patterns of E flat altered sounds. And you're going to play 5 arpeggio and 5 scale patterns for the E flat dominant altered sounds of music. The dominant sharp 11, dominant flat 13, dominant flat 9, flat 13, and the fully altered dominant sound. So, as I always like to say, regardless of where you are in your jazz journey, a beginner, an intermediate player, an advanced player, or even if you consider yourself a seasoned and experienced professional, you're going to find this Jazz Piano Skills podcast lesson exploring jazz improvisation exercises for E flat altered sounds to be very beneficial. But before we dig in, if you are new to the Jazz Piano Skills podcast, if you are new to Jazz Piano Skills, I want to welcome you and invite you to become a Jazz Piano Skills member. There are various membership plans to choose from, so check it out at JazzPianoSkills.com to learn more about the perks of each membership plan. There are educational weekly podcast packets, sequential jazz piano curriculum, which is loaded with comprehensive courses, an online weekly masterclass, online interactive fakebook, online private Jazz Piano Skills community, which hosts a variety of engaging forums. There's unlimited private, personal, and professional educational support available as well. All these perks are waiting for you, waiting to help you discover, learn, and play jazz piano. So take a minute, check it all out at JazzPianoSkills.com and become a member. Of course, if you have any questions regarding the various membership plans or any of the perks, please do not hesitate to reach out to me, contact me. I'm always happy to spend some time with you and answer any questions that you may have. All right, so let's deal with the question of the week. Now, this week's question comes from Patrick Knob, living in Jamestown, New York. Now, Patrick's question is one that I know many of you are asking, right? And I say this because I think just about every student I have taught over the last 30 years eventually gets around to asking me this very same question. Patrick's question is this: I read all over the internet how important modes are for developing improvisation skills. Personally, I find it difficult to think about the modes when I'm trying to play. Can you offer any tips on how I can develop this skill to help me become a better improviser? Fantastic question. Was I right or was I right? Many of you are thinking right now, yes, I feel the same way. I have thought those very same thoughts often. Well, let me shine a little light on this widespread question. First, let's answer another question before tackling Patrick's question, because the answer to this question will help us answer Patrick's question. And the question is this: what are modes? Now, if you do a Google search, you will undoubtedly get a lot of information from a lot of people on what modes are, how to practice them, and how to use them. So let me save you a lot of time and frustration and answer this question as succinctly as possible. Modes are an explanation of the origin of a specific chord. I'm going to say that again. Modes are an explanation of the origin of a specific chord. In other words, all chords come from somewhere. They do not exist within a piece of music enjoying autonomy. Every chord functions within a scale. And we call this chord-scale relationship a mode. Now, with that being said, it is also important for me to take a minute and tell you what a mode is not. It is not an improvisation approach. When we try to approach improvisation from a chord-scale relationship, modes, we end up flying off the rails. Our thinking becomes laborsome, and our playing becomes frantic, quite honestly. Our improvisation sounds scale-like at best. And what a bummer. All that intense thinking about modes to only produce a minimal, if any, positive return on our investment. So, Patrick, my tip to you and all Jazz Piano Skills listeners, stop trying to think about modes as an approach to improvisation. Modes are not an improvisational approach. Modes illuminate for us the pool of inside notes that we can use to improvise with a specific chord. This is so important because once we can identify the inside notes, we can now locate and identify the outside notes. Inside, referring to the 7 diatonic notes of a scale, and outside refers to the 5 tension notes that do not belong to the scale. Once we can see this chord-scale relationship, we can begin to develop jazz vocabulary by utilizing various patterns, by applying, various patterns to the mode, which will then begin to surface in our playing when improvising. Bottom line, modes are important. Understanding chord-scale relationships is essential to being able to identify the right and wrong notes that can be played with each chord. In and of themselves, however, modes are not an improvisational approach. And in fact, if you try to apply this academic understanding of modes, music theory, if you will, when playing, you are in essence trying to swim across the Atlantic Ocean with sandbags strapped around your ankles. In other words, it's an impossible feat. The time to think about modes is when you are studying and practicing music, not when performing. So, Patrick, I hope this helps. And of course, so much more could be said, but if further clarification is needed, by all means, please, and this goes for any listener, please feel free to reach out to me and let me know. Always happy to help. Okay, so let's discover, learn, and play jazz piano. Let's get after these jazz improvisation exercises for the E-flat altered dominant sounds. As I mentioned in previous podcast episodes, students struggle with improvisation more often than not due to poor fingerings. Not a lack of skill, not a lack of theory familiarity, but simply due to immobile hands resulting from poor fingerings. And this is why we are devoting this entire year to answering some very important questions. Questions such as, what constitutes good fingering? What should we look for when establishing a fingering for certain musical phrases? What should we be trying to accomplish with our fingerings? Is there always a fingering option that will reign supreme over other possibilities? Are the golden rules of fingerings truly golden and should never be violated, such as using our thumb on a black note to begin a musical line or musical phrase? The whole point of our journey this year is to establish definitive answers for these types of questions, but to circumvent any type of fingering dilemma as well. In other words, we need to establish a simplistic approach to fingerings, and in doing so, establish mobility, unimpaired mobility for our right hand. This all sounds good, right? Of course it does, because deep down, we all know that if you can get your right hand to easily move around on the keyboard, you'll be able to play the tunes you love and embellish them with melodic improvisation. You'll be able to play jazz. And again, this is the entire point, the entire objective of this entire year, right? To simplify our fingering approach, to establish a fingering conviction, if you will, that will allow us to begin successfully practicing and establishing good fingering for all 60 chords using typical jazz patterns, right? In doing so, solidify a fingering muscle memory that will ultimately free us up to think about musical expression, musical emotion, musical articulation, creativity. So to begin this liberation, I want you to begin paying very close attention to playing all musical patterns using intentional hand shifts. This is my mantra for this year, right? Whether they're primary sounds, whether they're altered sounds, right? Intentional hand shifts. So important. And I will speak more about this when I play each pattern today. So, all right, enough said. Let's get down to business. So the educational agenda for today is as follows. Number 1, we are going to explore jazz improvisation exercises for the E-flat altered dominant sounds. Number 2, we will play essential E-flat altered arpeggio patterns that you will need to discover, learn, and play from the root to the 13th of the sound using various entry points. The third, the root, the third, the fifth, and the 7th. Number 3, we will play essential E-flat altered scale patterns that you need to discover, learn, and play from the root to the 13th of the sound, and again, using various entry points, the root, the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th. Number 4, I will be playing all jazz improvisation exercises today using the E-flat 7 flat 13 sound. And number 5, I will be playing all jazz improvisation exercises using a traditional swing groove of 110. So if you are a JazzPianoSkills member, I want you to take a few minutes right now. I want you to hit the pause button. I want you to access and download and print your podcast packets, your illustrations, your lead sheets, and your play-alongs. Again, your membership grants you access to all of the educational podcast packets for every weekly podcast episode. So take advantage of this. As I mentioned As I mentioned every week, you should be using these podcast packets when listening to this episode. And of course, you should be using your podcast packets at the piano when practicing as well. Now, if you are listening to this podcast on any of the popular podcast directories, and there are countless number of them, including Apple, Google, Amazon, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, and on, then be sure to go directly to JazzPianoSkillsPodcast.com to download your podcast packets. And you'll find the active download links in the show notes. All right, one final but very significant message for some of you out there, right? And some of you may be thinking as you're listening to this podcast that the jazz improvisation exercises for the E-flat altered dominant sounds and the various skills that we are about to discover, learn, and play, you're thinking that it's all over your head. Well, maybe so. But I would say to you, no worries. Continue to listen and continue to grow your jazz piano skills intellectually by listening. That's all you have to do. Listen to this podcast episode. And every new skill is over our heads when first introduced. But this is how we get better, right? We forge ahead. We place ourselves smack dab in the middle of conversations where we are hearing terms that we've never heard before. We're hearing language that we've never heard before. And it forces us to grow intellectually. I say it all the time. All musical growth begins upstairs, mentally, before it can come out downstairs physically in our hands. So just sit back, listen to this podcast lesson now to discover and to learn. The play, as it always does, will come in time. I guarantee it. Now that you have your lead sheets in your hands, I want to point out a few things. You will see that lead sheets 1 through 4 deal with altered arpeggio motion, while lead sheets 5 through 8 deal with altered scale motion. You will also notice that the jazz improvisation exercises are the same for all 4 altered E-flat dominant sounds, whether it's the sharp 11, flat 13, flat 9, flat 13, and the fully altered flat 9, sharp 9, flat 5, sharp 5 sound. The exercises are, of course, modified fingering-wise to reflect the proper sound. You'll also notice that my suggested fingerings are included for every note on every exercise, for every sound, right? Of course, you can modify the fingerings. We have talked about this before in previous podcasts. You can indeed modify the fingerings slightly, but be careful. Remember, the fingerings are what allow you to play with proper jazz articulation, and the fingerings are designed to have intentional hand shifts built into them. So if you're actually modifying the fingering to remove the hand shift, big no-no, because now you're defeating the entire purpose of what we're trying to accomplish with these exercises. So just be careful, right? You may be thinking that you're changing the fingerings to an easier fingering. However, your easier fingering may actually, in the long run, make it harder for you to play, incorporating the hand shifts and proper jazz articulation. So I'm just throwing caution to the wind. Just be careful. Feel free to modify, but be careful. Okay, so let's dig in. I want you to grab scale 2, lead sheet 2, and I want you to grab scale 6 or lead sheet 6. I want you to pull them out of your lead sheets packet because I am going to model everything today using the dominant flat 13 sound, using arpeggio motion and using scale motion. We've already dealt this year with the sharp 11 sound. We've already dealt with the flat 9, flat 13 sound. We've already dealt with the fully altered sound. So today I thought, what the heck, we should attack the flat 13 sound as well. So skill 2, skill 6, grab those lead sheets. All right, so let's look at skill 2, lead sheet 2. Letter A, right? We have 4-note arpeggio with the entry point of the root, 4-note arpeggio, entry point of the third, 4-note arpeggio, entry point of the fifth, 4-note arpeggio, entry point of the seventh. All ascending arpeggios that take us from the root of the sound all the way through the 13th of the sound. You'll notice where I have the hand shifts taking place in these 4-note arpeggios. So the very first one, I have a 2, 1, 2, 4. So that hand shift is taking place right away. 2 to 1. Okay. The entry point of the third, interesting, right? I have us playing the first 3 notes, the third, fifth, and seventh, using our first, second, and fourth fingers. And then shifting the hand to the F with the thumb, right? That way we can continue our musical line in a real situation. If we were improvising, I can continue upward. All right, now the entry point of the fifth, 2, 4, 1, 3 fingering, and the entry point of the seventh, a 2, 1, 2, 4 fingering. Now notice on that entry point of the seventh, the 2, 1, 2, 4, that C is flatted at the top. There's our flat 13 sound, right? So let's bring our ensemble in. I'm going to play through each one of these arpeggios 4 times before moving on to the next entry point. So 4 times entering from the root, 4 times entering from the third, 4 times from the fifth, 4 times from the seventh. All right? So here we go. Let's bring the ensemble in and let's check out letter A, the E flat 7 flat 13 sound using ascending arpeggio motion. Here we go. Right? I've mentioned this before. Out of all the patterns on each one of these sounds, letter A is always going to be the most important. Spend the most time on letter A. Get those fingerings, get those shifts, get the right articulation, make it sound like jazz. You'll be doing yourself an amazing favor when doing so. Okay, so now letter B, we just kind of tweak this pattern a little bit. Instead of a straight up arpeggio, we now kind of have a little shape to this line. Nice. But the entry points are going to remain the same, right? The root, the third, the fifth, the seventh, exploring the entire sound from the root to the 13th. Of course, anytime we run across the C in our patterns, that C is going to be flatted because of the flat 13 sound, right? So let's bring our ensemble in. Pay careful attention to the fingerings and where those hand shifts are taking place. And let's have some fun with letter B. Here we go. Okay, so now on to letter C. This is, I mentioned letter A is the most important pattern on all these exercises for each sound. But I got to tell you, letter C is a close second because it forces some serious movement of our hands. Also, you'll notice in letter C, I break some of the golden rules here, like especially the golden rule of beginning a line with the musical phrase that starts with a black note. Avoid using the thumb. We're not going to do that. We're actually intentionally going to use the thumb. So you'll see there with the entry point of the root, we have a 1-4, 1-4, 2-1 fingering, right? So we're getting this to play that line. Fingering works fantastic. The hand is moving. It's exactly what we want. We do the same type of approach with our third entry, with our fifth entry, and with our seventh entry. Don't forget, our C is flatted for our flat 13 sound. So let's bring the ensemble in and let's check out letter C. Here we go. Absolutely love it. Now, letter A, most important. Letter C, nice challenge with the hand shifting. Letter D, no question about it. We introduce these eighth note triplets every month, and I find these to be the most challenging, and I think you would agree with that as well. So we have the same exact approach, right? A root entry, third entry, fifth, and seventh entry. We explore the entire sound, but check it out. We have eighth note triplets on count 1, count 2, count 3. And we need to have good fingerings in order to pull off these eighth note triplets in time. So spend some time studying where these hand shifts are taking place to allow us to, with ease, to navigate through these ascending, descending eighth note triplets. So let's bring the ensemble in. Let's check out letter D. Let's see what this sounds like. Have a little fun. Here we go. about it, right? Eighth note triplets, not easy, but well worth it, right? They are laced. Eighth note triplets are laced throughout jazz literature and jazz solos. So definitely spend some time with letter D. All right, back to letter E now. Back to eighth note, straight eighth note patterns that stretch across the bar line into a second measure. Again, though, however, same format, right? Root entry, third entry, fifth entry, seventh entry. Once again, we may have multiple hand shifts taking place in this extended line, so watch the fingerings very, very carefully. All right, so let's bring the ensemble in. This is our last exercise using altered the dominant flat 13 sound, arpeggio motion for E flat, letter E. So here we go. Check it out. All right, that completes our skill 2, lead sheet 2, with our arpeggio patterns exploring the E flat dominant flat 13 sound. So now grab lead sheet 6, skill 6. We have 5 additional patterns, but these focus on scale motion as opposed to arpeggio motion. We're going to use the same format though, right? We're going to have a root entry, third, fifth, and seventh entry on each of these patterns, exercises, A, B, C, D, and E. Each of these patterns have intentional hand shifts in each pattern as well. And with the scale, unlike the arpeggio motion, there was always, there's some patterns with the arpeggio motion that you don't find the flat 13 in the pattern, and that's okay. Scale movement, however, that's a different story. We have a flat 13 in every one of these patterns, right? So like look at letter A, starting with the root entry. There's our flat 13, right? To finish the scale. That's a scale with the flat 13. If we start with the third entry, flat 13 in that as well. Fifth entry, flat 13 in that scale. Seventh entry, flat 13 in that as well. So we're going to be dealing with that flat 13 sound a lot in each one of these exercises. So let's bring the ensemble in. Let's check out letter A. 4 times root entry, 4 times through with the third entry, 4 times through with the fifth, 4 times through with the seventh entry. So here we go. Check it out. Really nice. You know, one thing I should mention, in my left hand, I am playing traditional 3-note shells in my left hand. I'm playing the 3rd, the 7th, and the 9th. Sometimes I like to play just the 3rd and the 7th when I'm doing these types of exercises. But feel free, if you're comfortable with playing more comfortable with playing a block shape in your left hand, fine. If you want to use a contemporary shape, chordal shape in your left hand, that's fine as well. I'm using, just so you know, primarily today I'm using a traditional 3-7-9 voicing in my left hand, or just simply a 3-7 in my left hand. So, okay, so let's take a look at letter B. Same type of idea here, just a little twist to the arpeggio, to the ascending scale. We change it up just a little bit with a nice leap here at the beginning. Okay, we do that same motif off the 3rd, off the 5th, off the 7th, again 4 times with each musical phrase. So let's bring the ensemble in. Let's check out letter B. Listen for the flat 13, of course, and pay attention to the fingerings and the hand shifts within those fingerings. So here we go. Check it out. Nice. Absolutely love it. But check out letter C. You know, if we had to deal with 8th note triplets using arpeggio motion, you know we should be dealing with 8th note triplets using scale motion. And of course we are. Letter C, we have 8th note triplets on every beat of the measure. Count 1, count 2, count 3, count 4. Definitely pay attention to the fingering and the hand shifting that is taking place. The line stretches across the bar line into measure 2. There's a flat 13 in each one of these lines, so pay attention to that as well and listen for that flat 13. So you're incorporating ear training with these exercises as well, right? Okay, so let's bring the ensemble in. Here we go with letter C, E flat 7, flat 13, using 8th note triplets, root entry, 3rd entry, 5th entry, 7th entry. Here we go. Always a challenge, right? The eighth note triplet, always a challenge. All right, so let's move on to letter D. We're back to eighth notes again, but the phrase stretches across the bar line into measure 2, all eighth note movement, right? So again, multiple hand shifts in these patterns, and each one of these patterns incorporates the flat 13, so be listening for that. And root entry, 3rd, 5th, and 7th. I cannot stress to you enough how important it is to practice scales, to practice arpeggios using various entry points. Become root independent, right? Various entry points, not only because you want to become root independent, but you also want to play shapes and patterns within the scale that stretch through the entire sound, from the root all the way to the 13th, right? The ears have to be actively engaged in growing in this process as well. So here we go with letter D, E flat 7, flat 13. Check it out. We are down to our very last exercise for today. And I just want to say that, again, remind you that, yes, you may modify the fingering slightly, as long as your modifications do not eliminate hand shifts within these patterns, right? We want the hand developing mobility and moving. So we're not trying to, a lot of times with fingering, I think the instinct is to limit the movement of the hand. We're trying to do the opposite here. We want the hand moving, okay? We're trying to intentionally develop mobility and comfort with the hand constantly shifting across the keys. All right, so with that being said, check out letter E, more eighth notes to deal with. Again, playing across the bar line all the way to count 2 of measure 2. Ascending motion. We have a flat 13, of course, to deal with. That's what we're focusing on today. And as we've been doing all day today, 4 different entry points, the root, the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th. So let's bring the ensemble in and let's listen to our very last exercise for today, pattern for today, letter E. Here we go. always, we have unpacked a ton of information in one very short and very fast hour. Now, even though I played the jazz improvisation exercises today, focusing on the dominant flat 13 sound only, and I did that just because of the sake of time, be sure to practice these very same patterns, these very same exercises for the dominant sharp 11, dominant flat 9, flat 13, and the E flat dominant fully altered sounds as well. They are all included in your podcast packet, in your lead sheets, and they all have the suggested fingerings for each of the notes as well. Okay, they're all laid out for you in your lead sheets podcast packet with the fingerings, so be sure to utilize them. Now, I just mentioned you can modify the fingerings slightly. Just be careful, right? You know the drill by now. All right, you have a ton to tackle this week, a ton to practice. So use your time wisely. Next week, we explore a bebop tune, and we put our fingerings to the test and see how we're developing, right? Closely examining the various melodic shapes and fingerings of some standard bebop tune. Should be a lot of fun. All right? Most of all, I want you to be patient. I stress this every week, that developing mature and professional jazz piano skills takes time. It takes a lot of time. There are no shortcuts. Begin structuring your practicing after the playing demonstrations that I modeled for you today in this podcast episode, using your lead sheets and the correct fingerings, and I guarantee it, you will begin to see, you will begin to feel and hear your musical progress. Well, I hope you have found this Jazz Piano Skills podcast lesson exploring jazz improvisation exercises for E-flat altered sounds to be insightful and, of course, to be beneficial. Don't forget, if you are a Jazz Piano Skills Ensemble member, I will see you online Thursday evening at the Jazz Piano Skills Masterclass. That's going to be 8 p.m. Central Time, to discuss this podcast episode lesson, exploring jazz improvisation exercises for E-flat altered sounds in greater detail, and of course to answer any questions that you may have about the study of jazz in general. You can reach me if you have any questions regarding this podcast episode or the podcast packets and materials. You can reach me always by phone, 972-380-8050. My extension is 211. If you prefer, you can email me. That's Dr. Lawrence, drlawrence at JazzPianoSkills.com. Or you can use the nifty little SpeakPipe widget that is nestled, I believe, on every single page of the Jazz Piano Skills website to reach out to me that way as well. Well, there is my cue. That's it for now. And until next week, I want you to enjoy the jazz improvisation exercises for E-flat altered sounds. And most of all, I want you to have fun as you discover, learn, and play jazz piano.